Howdy, this is David Groce, Texas Tax and Lawman. Today, we're going to talk about mergers and acquisitions, and I've invited my friend Garry Krum with Agora Consulting to come and talk to us about how he helps clients and his vast experience in mergers and acquisitions. So thank you for joining us today.
Great. Thanks for having me, Dan. This is fun.
It is fun. So before we dive in, let me kind of just overview what is a merger and acquisition. Lots of people, it sounds cool. It's something the rich guys on TV do, but for my typical small business owner client, what does that really mean? And I kind of take us to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1. It says that there's a time for everything under the sun. Lots of people come to my office. They're so excited they want to start a business. And we do probably help 40 to 60 people a year start a brand new business. We help lots of people grow their business. It goes through a lifetime, just like with your kids. Start with little shoes. The shoes get bigger. But then, we get older and we can't see as well, can't hear as well. And there may be a time that we need to transition our business instead of just letting it die.
That's right.
I've helped people do that. And the term we use is a merger or acquisition. If somebody takes over and runs it, or if you were able to go join business with somebody else. But if they're not able to do that, either with the next generation or another owner, well, what are they left with? Liquidation, or they just have to go turn the sign on the door from open to close, and it just kind of falls, and that's sad. And so I think the goal of mergers and acquisitions is to try to help you continue your story. Right? The Lord's entrusted this business to you. You've done the very best you can with it, and now you want to go do something else. And so, Garry, tell us about Agora, about your company, and give us a working definition of mergers and acquisitions. What does that mean to you?
So an acquisition is the art of buying a company.
Okay.
A divestment is the act of selling a business.
Okay.
And a merger is the act of two companies coming together and merging, becoming one company out of two companies. So they're kind of technical terms, but that's, and why they just call it M&A or mergers and acquisitions is beyond me. I don't really know. But every business has to exit at some point in time, right? You've got businesses that have been around for hundreds of years. Those are public companies for the most part, or they've been given to children and then the next generation and the next generation. But in most cases, people have to exit their business at some point in time. And so that's a divestment. They have to divest themselves of their assets, of their business, and hopefully, get something for that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I like the term divestment. If we just look at the etymology of the word, right, you could invest, which is where you are in the start, but then you have to divest. You have to cut it in half or cut it apart. And so, people would like to do that in a way that you actually get some value out of the business.
That's the idea.
Right, because you've built it all up to something. I did have a client I helped them for about a dozen years. But the business had been started in 1917. It was operated through World War I, the Great Depression. It made it all the way to the 21st century, but they had built up so much inventory and so much cash that everything was paid for. We couldn't qualify any buyer or get a buyer to find any financing where they could actually buy the business. So we had to do a liquidation. The client wasn't willing to do owner financing. He just wanted his cash. So it was about a year and a half liquidation, and we rented out the real estate, and then we sold off the real estate. But that sign was taken off the door. That corner of town that had always been that store was no longer. So to me, that's a sadness. I mean, they got to retire and accomplish their goals, but their kids didn't want to take it over, and they couldn't find anybody who was passionate to take it over, and the story ended.
That story is very common. So I actually started in M&A world back in 1981. I've been doing this for 44, 45 years.
All right.
Long time. And I worked on Wall Street for 3.5 years, flying all over the country, doing deals. And then I I got pretty burnt out. So I went into company and went into a corporation and worked as what we call corporate development, which is the acquisitions of businesses for that business. And I did that for many, many years. And then my wife and I and our two sons moved to Colorado about 22 years ago. And I started Agora because I saw the tools that corporations had. where they could hire a team of attorneys and a team of accountants and lots of, acquisition people or whatever, because they were doing larger deals, right? And they could afford a big team. But I've always had a heart for small businesses. I've always had a heart for people that went out and did something and started something, that took an idea. They were talented enough to turn it into something that could make them money, right? And enjoy either, a nice lifestyle or even a simple lifestyle, but they could make money off of that. And so the idea was, what could we do? What could we take into the world for the smaller business person? How could we help them, giving them the same quality of skills and abilities, I bet, on a smaller team, a smaller scale? Because if you sell a business, it doesn't matter if you're selling a $1 million business or you're selling a $500 million business. You have to go through the same steps. And so we wanted to be able to give people the same idea. And so Agora is a Greek word, and it's in the New Testament. Wherever Paul and other people, when they go into a city, they always would go into what was called Agora, or the Agora, and the Agora was the marketplace. So Agora really means marketplace in Greek. And so that's what we wanted to do, is we wanted to take and go into the marketplace to help marketplace people, right, be able to buy and sell businesses. And that's where Agora started, and that's where it came from.
I love it. As Christians, our job is just to be real, right? I've taught Sunday school for years, and I enjoyed the Contagious Christianity series put out by Willow Creek, and it says that Christians are supposed to be contagious wherever we are.
Right. That's right.
Right, that there's this joy, and that's what I see in my clients who start businesses. Everybody wants to get paid, but they're passionate about something.
Right.
And we have to take that to the marketplace, and the challenge in the marketplace then becomes aligning yourself or finding somebody else who could share that passion and carry that on. And that's a big challenge for lots of people.
Yeah. I mean, we have small clients and we have larger clients. And you can't charge a small company the fees that you could charge a larger company because of leverage, right? If you help them do something and they take that, let's just say $200,000 fee, but then they can leverage that into a couple $1 million return, that's there. But a smaller company can't quite leverage it like that. So we proportion our fees according to the size of the business that we're at. And we have a verse, right, sort of my life verse, that is 2 Corinthians 2:14. And what it says is, but thanks be to God, right, who always leads us in his triumph and manifests through us the sweet aroma of the knowledge of him from place to place. And so that's what we do, right? We try to be the sweet aroma of Jesus in the marketplace. That's our job as Christians, to bless the marketplace, to help the marketplace, to be helpful to people, whether they're a small business or they're a big business. That's what we wake up every morning and go do. It's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. It's kind of like the sunshine, right? As my son was in high school football, was kind of grinding it out. I said, son, it's not diligence if you go and work real hard for a week or even for 2 weeks. Diligence is like God's sunshine. It shows up every morning. It's reliable, and that's how we should be, is that we should always be pursuing excellence and faithfulness, and that does transform. I mean, why do we have Christian chicken? Everybody loves to go eat Chick-fil-A, right? And why do these companies succeed? It's because they're doing something right? And that they are delivering an excellent service at a fair price, or excellent product at a fair price. And those are the companies that succeed. And when they don't do that, they don't.
That's right.
So when we talk about a divestment or an acquisition or even merging, I mean, your company, you help people find businesses to acquire as much as trying to help them find things to sell. You do both sides of that?
Yeah, we do both acquisitions and sale work support. But we don't actually do transactions. Okay. That's what we let people like you do.
All right, I get a place on the team.
You do. Our job is to go in and help a business, right, get ready for exit. And here's the problem, right? If you go back to what you just talked about a lot of companies, it's not a divestment, it's a liquidation, because they're not able to divest their business. And so what they end up doing is they end up just kind of soaking the cash as much as they can, winding down their operations and closing the door, which is kind of sad. You would like your legacy to continue. So what we do is we go in and help business owners. We educate them around what does it mean for me to actually become what we call exit ready. How do I actually get my business to the point where I can exit? It may not be for 3 or 4 or 5 years. But we want people to begin to think about the things that they're going to need to do to have a successful exit. The statistics are horrible, right? Only 1 in 5 businesses will actually sell, actually do a transaction and actually sell their business to somebody else. That means 4 are going to fail. And so we'd like to sort of up those odds a little bit and help people get prepared and get ready. And, now we've got a whole lot of older folks that were the boomer generation, like I was, that have businesses that would like to do something with them. And there's things that they can do, some very simple and very practical, some might be a bit more sophisticated, but helping them do that. Most businesses think, even people that think they have a good business, I'm kind of growing, my business is doing well, I've got employees, I've got good revenue, my financials are in pretty good shape. I'm making money, right? They look at that and they say, I've got a pretty good little business. The problem is that they think they could just go along, and then someday flip a switch, find a broker, put me out in the marketplace and sell me. And rarely does that work because buyers are much more sophisticated. And buyers also have a lot of opportunities in front of them. They might be looking at 10, 20 different companies. And so you have to become the apple in their eye. You have to become, the cream of the crop in order to appeal to them. And so that's what we help companies be able to do to get ready to sell.
I love it. Sometimes just knowing the word, it's kind of like a password, right? It opens the door of opportunity for you. So, if we're trying to begin with the end in mind, if our goal is to exit, well, most people don't even know they have to be ready. You're right. I get lots of people that say, I'm making money. And they'll get offers in the small business world. When I talk about a business, it's maybe making a top line revenue of gross sales of $5 million, and they're getting to keep $500,000 at the end of the day. And somebody offers them $2 million for that business. My question is, well, if that's all of your assets and how many years of your cash flow, are you really willing to step away if they're only going to offer you $1.5 million? That's 3 years. And so they have to. Part of this exit ready is educational process, right? I mean, there's something that goes into that.
That's right.
So tell us, what does that exit ready process look like? Is that steps? Is that does it take time? How does that work?
It takes a lot of time.
Okay.
And an owner, right, in a business, you're working on your business, you're working in your business, you're doing stuff every day, and now you have to sort of sit back and say, wait a minute, let me look at that crystal ball. What am I trying to do? So just to make it real simple, we ask 3 fundamental questions.
Okay.
Right? The first question we ask is, what have you got? What do you have? What is your business? What is your products? What is your services? Who do you sell into? Right? What do you have? How many employees do you have? What are their jobs? In other words, what service or capability or product are you offering the marketplace? And what are they paying you in return? What are you getting back in return? So the first one thing we want to do is we want to sort of assess the business. What have you got? What are you doing? The second question that we ask is, okay, you've got this thing, right? And you're looking down the road at, wanting to get out, or wanting to sell it, wanting to retire, whatever the reasons are. Maybe, your health isn't as good, or you're tired and it's time to stop. So what do you want to do with it, right? What would you like to do? Is it something that you want to transfer to your kids? Is it something that you think that there might be a good buyer for it? Do you know a buyer that maybe would be interested in that particular business? So what do you want to do? That's a harder question than most people think it is, because there's lots of options. And when you look at the options, you have to kind of consider which of these is the best given my landscape and which one I like to pursue. And so it takes time to answer that question. And so once you've got the idea and understanding of what you got in detail, and there's an assessment part that goes with that, and you understand now that you'd like to go do this, I'd like to sell it to a strategic buyer. Then you have to consider, the third question is, okay, how do I position my business so it appeals to a buyer? Because it's a misnomer, right? People aren't really selling their business. What they're really trying to do is to find a buyer, find a good buyer, somebody that will take their business and rock and roll with it and make more money and continue the legacy to some degree. So it's not trying to sell your business, it's really trying to find a buyer. And in order to find a buyer, you have to look good. You have to have, good financials, and you have to have good products, and you have to have growing revenue and so forth. And so there's a lot of characteristics of a really good company. And so we look at those fundamental questions, and we do an assessment over 35 different factors: revenue growth, leadership, skills and abilities, operational excellence, morale of a company's employees, all kinds of different factors, to then be able to say which of these factors are going to be more important to your potential buyer, and which of these do we want to make better and more appealing to a buyer, so that when a buyer says, hey, I want to go buy, ABC, then when they start to look at those businesses, your business is the one that pops up at the top of the list, that they go, oh, that one, I like that one the best. That's what we try to do.
Yeah, wow, that's a great summary. Let's kind of pick that apart a little bit. I mean, if I were to summarize what you've just said, is that the buyer, the seller, is going to need to do some introspection, right? Mm-hmm. Lots of sellers are really just looking at the bottom line,
right? And
they may not even realize. I mean, my experience is there are two kinds of business owners: those that are good at the business, they're a great HVAC guy, they're a great plumber, they're a great electrician. Or those that are good at running a business, the process kind of guys.
Right.
The MBA, the guy who bought them a franchise, and they know how to manage a well-oiled machine. And each of those owners wind up hiring to their weakness, whether they use those specific terms or not.
Yep.
That's what they do. So the good old boy who's great at doing his trade, his sweet wife becomes an expert at payroll, HR, and everything else.
That's right.
And she becomes this wonderful business administrator.
Right.
And the guy who thinks he's the sharpest tack in the room, and MBA can dot every I, cross every T, but he doesn't know how to sell, or he doesn't know how to manufacture his product. He's kind of limited by his number one salesman, or he's limited by his manufacturing guy. But it takes some introspection, and few people are willing to admit their weaknesses, right? They just think, I got a business and it's running, and they don't often look inside because they're so outward focused at what they're doing to achieve their target of delivering the product or selling their service, that they don't get that there were internal things that they did either knowingly or unintentionally, or just because they had to. And so lots of this is going to require them to look at the inside.
There's a price to pay, right? And unless you're willing to pay the price, you're not going to get there. If I decided that I wanted to go run a marathon, it's going to take me a while, and I have to have the diligence and focus to prepare my body so I don't die, right, running that particular marathon. So it's the same thing. If you're not willing to pay the price, you're not going to run the marathon. If you're not willing to pay the price to get your business in some sort of sellable fashion, it probably is not going to sell, or if it does sell, it's not going to sell for what it's really worth.
So, I think that's a marvelous point. Lots of times people don't get what they want because they don't even know what they're asking for, number one, and they don't even know what they're offering.
That's right.
Right, I mean, it's just built into we just do it, right? And there's a lot of guys that are humble about that, right? Then there's other guys that are very process-oriented, and they can give you a spreadsheet of how they got there or a flow chart. But when we say pay the price, one of my fundamental convictions is that anything worth having costs you something, right? You want a great business, you're going to have to invest. It costs money to make money. It's going to cost your time, your talent, your treasure, your labor. But just like your marriage, if you want to have a great marriage, I had the joy of teaching a young married class, and the guys would be married 6 months to a year, and they'd be working. They'd come and say, my job is so hard, my boss is so demanding. I got to memorize all these new sales sheets, and he wants me to finish my work on time. I said, well, how are you doing? Well, it's fine. I've studied all that. I did great. I got a good review. But my wife, she just says I'm not paying attention. My question was, well, if you work so hard at your job, did you work just as hard in your marriage? And it is intentional, right? If we want good results, we got to be able to put in the hard work.
So, exactly.
Number one, if we knew that the target was to make our business buyer ready, that's going to cost us something in time and talent. We're going to have to be introspective, and lots of small business owners are extroverts and are looking out at what they deliver and don't really look at their internal processes. They just tell you, I got to do what I got to do.
So if you go back to those questions, that first question, what do you got? what is your business? We need to do an assessment so you understand of those various parts of your business, which ones can really be cool, right? You take a product, right? Any part, the car, for instance, right? There are certain things that car manufacturers want to emphasize to make buyers find that attractive. Same thing with business buyers. There are just certain things that they're going to find attractive, and it varies from buyer to buyer. And so you want to kind of be hitting on all cylinders. And it's the same thing when you talk about preparation, right? How do we prepare to get an exchange of value so I give my business to this new buyer, right? And they give me something in return. Well, what is that? What does that look like? What's it really worth realistically? What's the market say? I mean, I can say I have a 1,500 square foot home that I live in Colorado, northern Colorado, and we can say, hey, our home's worth $5 million. Nobody's going to buy it for that, right? So it has to be a realistic value if I wanted to sell my house. Same thing with the business. There are markets out there that, people buy businesses. There's lots and lots of businesses that change hands every year. And so we can figure out what that business on the market is worth, which is usually different from what an owner thinks his business is worth.
Yeah, for sure. We probably sell or buy one or two businesses a year along with helping people start. And that's usually a giant question, right? It does take some introspection, and even when I'm helping one partner buy out the other partner, one will come and tell me it's worth 10 times. Another will come and tell me, no, it's not worth that. And so if you do go get some comps and you do look in the industry specific, you do see that there's some norms, right? And sometimes in the smaller business, the value's in the assets. Sometimes it's in the product, sometimes it's the intellectual property. But that first question of what do you have, and then what do you want to do, right? Do I want to sell this thing off, lock, stock, and barrel? For my one client that we couldn't sell and we had to liquidate, he was not willing to lease a space. Right?
Huh.
So that was just so strange. He told me he wouldn't do that, and he told me he wouldn't own or finance. Well, after he liquidated, all he had was the real estate left. Guess what he had to do? Rent the space. Right? So if we could have had some movement on what did he want, well, okay, maybe I would carry the note. Well, then we wouldn't have had to do this 90-day liquidation, store closing, wholesale. It did get it over with. But maybe he would have been better carrying the note and letting the guy pay him out over time. I'm not second guessing, but I look at that transaction and say, if you answered that second question differently, what do I want? And for lots of clients, their small business was their income.
Right.
And so people make a mistake, in my view, of thinking that I want a transaction that sells me out and pays me a big lump sum. Because that lump sum is only going to get them a certain amount from their financial advisor.
Yep.
And if it's only going to pay them 5% on $5 million, they're going to make $250 a year. Well, for most of us, we'd say, well, that's not bad. I think I could live on $250 a year. Well, except that he was used to living on $500,000 a year.
Right.
And he was taking care of all of his kids and all of his grandkids, and all of a sudden the guy's now feeling broke on what most people would feel was that a successful number. Right. So lots of that is balanced out. What if you were to rent the property? What if you were to carry the note? Those are different ways to generate value, but that's a great second question is, what do you want to do?
Well, it gives us an opportunity to talk into that person's business and their life. Options. What do you want? What does your wife want? Maybe there's family members involved. What kinds of dynamics are happening there? Do I sell my business for one lump sum? Do I sell my business maybe some dollars up front, and then I have a longer tail where they're going to pay me over time, which has certain advantages and disadvantages, but certain advantages. How do we structure that? Am I doing an asset sale where I'm selling my assets, or do I sell my business, my stock, my ownership of my business? There's pros and cons for those kinds of things. So it gives us a chance to educate the client and sit down with them and discuss through the options. We have a gal right now that we're working with that has a very small business. She's $350,000 a year in revenue, very small business, right? But it's a cool little business given what she does. And she makes about $125,000 profit off that. Good margin business, right? But in looking at her business, we're saying, what you do has the potential to grow. So if we could find a business that's synergistic to what yours is, that finds your business really attractive and can bolt it on to what they do and grow it out in various places rather than this one location that you're working, that in a sense that seed could then grow, well, that's worth more money to her than just having her sell her business to somebody. And so we discuss those kinds of options. What are the pros and cons of that? What would that entail? What would the issues be? What would a buyer's reactions and response be? Because if she was just going to sell her business to somebody, that's a different buyer than if we sold it as a seed to somebody that could take that and grow that business. So we try to talk about all of those options, get those things out on the table. What does it look like, and how do we best do that?
Yeah. So, when we talk about what do we want, that's a lot of the questions that do boil down to mechanics, right? On my end, if you then need to come get tax advice, some people divide up their lawyer role, and then they have an accountant, and you got to make sure those two people can come to an agreement. Yep. That's sometimes comical, but there's different consequences. If I can sell my stock, that's good for me because I can have a capital gain.
Right.
But if I sell my assets, I may have depreciation recapture, which is at ordinary income tax rates, which if it's a $2 million transaction, means I'm taxed at 39 or 37% plus the Obamacare net investment tax of 3.8%. So I'm paying 40.8% tax. Whereas if I could sell my blue sky or my goodwill, I could pay regular capital gains tax at 20%. But you still pay that net investment tax, right? Clients are like, I thought capital gains tax was 10, 15, or 20%. Where's this other 3.8% come in?
Yeah.
So there's kind of some layers here, right? So what Agora does is make you ready for the marketplace, but that's why we need some time, right? Some people just come and say, what would I get if I sold my business? Well, that's not a fair question, right? It depends how we sell the business and how we allocate those assets. But that's why you're telling me that there's this process of getting to be exit ready. It takes some introspection. What do I have, and then what do I want? And what you're really saying is, I'm trying to find somebody I could hand the keys over to drive my business, or put my business on their trailer, or add it to the fleet of their car. And that really, I shouldn't be looking at my business from my own eyes. I should be looking at it from somebody else's. Is that?
That's why we talk about you're not really selling your business. You're trying to find a buyer. So what does it look like now in the mind's eyes of a buyer? What is a buyer? How does he perceive your business? Because if you can translate that and make it appealing to a buyer, the chances of you selling your business are much higher, and the chances of you selling it for more value are much higher. If you go through that process, right? You want to appear to the top of that list of the 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 or whatever number of businesses that person is kicking the tires on. You want to be that person in first place. You want to be the one up there that has that most appealing business.
Well, let me clarify that. So you're telling me that if I'm selling this, the buyer is actually looking at other people?
Yes, sir.
So I don't think a small business owner thinks that. I think we have a naive assumption that somebody else is going to love this thing just like I do.
Right.
So I got a chuckle. One of my first clients, I was helping him rehab historic buildings into loft apartments. And it was my joy. I got the buildings listed on the National Historic Register. We got to claim the historic tax credit, which was great, but it did go through the general business credit. It got limited down, but it did give you real dollars in your pocket.
Right.
But he had been frustrated because he had gone and asked 2 banks and they'd said no. So he was a colorful fella, and he would go to the bookstore and sit there and read the latest business book and then come back and tell me what it said and ask me how we do it.
Yeah.
And this is back in the 90s before Donald Trump was president. But he had gone and read The Art of the Deal, and I was talking about getting a loan. And he said, Trump says that getting a loan is like getting a date on Friday night. You just call enough girls until they say yes, and then you go out on Friday, and then you got to call all the girls again for the next deal. And that just changes our mind, right? I mean, lots of us, whether it's in relationships or in our business, we're really just looking for the one, but you don't find the one by looking for the one. You got to think about, how do I make myself attractive to those that are looking.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
And that would then change the way that you'd present yourself, right? Maybe you do shine your shoes. Maybe you do straighten your tie, or make sure you ironed your clothes, right?
Yeah.
You would want to look good, smell good. You know, you want to drive up in the nice car that daddy's going to say yes. At least it looks like it's washed, even if it's old.
Yep.
So you've got to start looking at yourself from the position of a buyer. And that's a huge paradigm change.
Right.
From I'm trying to sell my business to I'm trying to be attractive to a buyer.
Well, but the natural mindset says, I got a nice business. I'm making money, like I said earlier. I've got employees. I'm doing pretty good, making profit. Somebody will buy my business. But the problem is, you just said it, most buyers are looking at multiple businesses. I mean, you can go all the way from private equity groups, right? A private equity group, they have lots of money. They're looking to buy business. They want to buy businesses because they want to put those funds that they've gotten to work. But they'll look at 100 businesses and maybe they might buy one or two. And the numbers are small. And even somebody that's buying a smaller business, we had a guy that called us a few months ago that was an HVAC guy in Atlanta. And he called because he had his business on the market for 9 months and he only had one person that was kind of kicking the tires. And he's going, what am I doing wrong? And so we got into it with him to try to understand. And he just figured that what he had was pretty cool and somebody would buy it. It's that bad assumption that really drives bad decisions and it closes doors down.
But, you know, when I was a kid, my dad would say, assumption, if I assume something, it makes an ass out of you and me, right?
Right.
But we make assumptions all the time and we don't even know that we did.
Yes.
Right. I mean, usually most small businesses are very determined people, right? If they made it past that first year mark and determined, I think starting a business, you're asking two questions. Do I like it? And will it make any money? Mm-hmm. And if you make it through year one and you hadn't starved to death, you stay at it for year two. And then if you stay at it long enough to year 5 and you've actually turned some profit, and then you decided to grow, that it's more than just a sole proprietorship, more than just you or me, right? People can't buy a sole prop generally because it's just your labor. So you've got to build a small business. And a business is where you make money off of a product or a service provided by other than just you.
Correct.
That somebody else could make money off of that same product or service that's not just you.
Right.
And that is a big step in and of itself. That's a mindset change, right? Most people start as a W-2 employee. I work for the man gives me a check. Then I'm going to be self-employed, and I'm going to work for myself. I'm going to pay all my bills, and whatever's left over is mine. That's a great step. But now you want to multiply that, right? So the Tandys were the richest people in Fort Worth for years and years, and they owned Tandy Leather and a number of different things. And their crude way to say this in the 70s was that we can make money off the sweat of our backs or the money off the sweat of other people's backs. And that's certainly not popular phraseology today.
Right.
If I were going to put it in 21st century speak, I would say you can get paid for your own sweat, you can get paid for the labor of your team, you can get paid from your property, your real estate, you can get paid from your investments, or you can get paid off of your technology and your ideas, but you're getting paid for something. And this idea of being buyer ready, you have to have something that somebody wants to acquire. And that takes a shift. Could an owner step into your office and run your machine? And if the thing is so tied up, you've hamstrung your business so much that it can't function without you, you don't really have anything that somebody else could buy.
Right, and that's the problem. What can I buy? If I can't buy anything, I'm sorry, there's nothing there. Sad story.
Okay.
I had an uncle, his name was Jim, and Jim made customized buses and trailers for rock stars, movie stars.
Okay.
I mean, these were tricked out. These were beautiful kinds of things. And he made these things, and he ran the business. He sold the business. He worked with people on the designs. He directed the crew. And he came to me one day because he was having some heart issues. He said, I think I need to be putting my business up for sale and selling my business. And I said, Jim, you can't sell your business. And he was kind of shocked. He goes, why not? And I says, because if you leave, I got no business. I can't design, I can't sell, I can't do this, I can't do that. Yeah, you have a few people that kind of do the work, but you're 95% of the business. I can't buy that if you leave. And so I said, you need to find somebody that can come in and replace you, that can be your journeyman, that can come in and do that work, that they can learn from you. And it may be 3 or 4 or 5 years before that person is really able to represent you well and take over the business. He may even want to buy your business. But there's issues, there's consequences of negative characteristics of a business. So when we do that assessment, we're looking for negatives. We're looking for things that are going to be a problem. A baseball batter that can't hit a curveball. Okay, he's not going to be a very good hitter. So what can we do when we find those things to replace those things? That's part of the plan. On the other hand, there are things that are good things. You've got great products, you've got great profit margin. Your product sells for a good chunk of change. It's in demand. It's popular. Your business is growing. You want to find characteristics that people want to purchase and continue. And so we try to magnify those things and make those things even better. So you want to raise the bar on your opportunities, and you want to get rid of the risks and lower the risks. And that's what we try to do.
Those are great things that every small business owner should be doing, right?
Should be doing.
Yeah, but you can't, if you didn't begin with end in mind, if you don't know that this story ends,
right?
If you don't know that this page turns,
Yeah, we like to start with the business 3 to 4 years from when they are really thinking about selling the business. Okay, and the problem is a lot of people don't think that, and then they get to the point where their health is bad, their business is kind of plateaued. A buyer doesn't want to buy a plateaued business, one that's flat. He wants to buy a business that's popular and growing. And so you want to be able to continue those things. So if, in Jim's case, if we would have started 3 to 4 years ahead, we would have somebody, right? I'm sorry?
Before his health was failing.
Exactly, right? But then people don't think that. And so they go along, and that's why only 1 out of 5 businesses sell. So those other 4 are caught in that I'm not ready, I don't think about it. So, man, if there's one message that I would love your audience to hear, and that is take the time to get prepared. It's a wonderful investment in your life, for your family, for yourself, that can help you get to that particular point.
So, for my own business, when I was a young man, I realized that kind of setting New Year's resolutions was not much of a real thing.
Right.
It sounded good or it felt good. But that you needed to build goals for the years and set out milestones of what you need to accomplish and put time frames on it. And then you need to sit down at the end of the year and you need to review that, right? When I was a young man, I'd say I wanted to get 20 things done a year in my 20s, and I would be mad when I only got 12 done. By the time I got about 30, I'd set it down to about 8. Then I'd get 7 or 8 done, and I'd still feel unsuccessful. By the time I got to 40, I would say, I want to do about 4 big things this year, right? I want to accomplish these 4 big objectives. And I could hit those, and then I'd pick up a few more of those, and I felt far more successful.
Right.
But then I have to review that at the end of the year, and that's, Stephen Covey would call it beginning with the end in mind.
Right.
But if we're reading our great book, our most favorite book, we need to know that book does have a last page, just like the book has a first page. And you can't get to the last page and say, well, gee, I wish I would have built myself up for it, right? I mean, if every favorite movie has a plot line, there's going to be this big dramatic moment, there's going to be a conclusion, then you're going to have your little postlude, and then you're going to have your end credits.
Right.
And if a person thinks that ending page is 65, they shouldn't start working on that at 64. Right? If they think, hey, I want to step out of here, they need to begin way back in time.
Right.
And so you're saying it's a 3 to 4 year process. I've had the joy of sitting on a number of different boards, and we'll have a senior management director of a nonprofit, the founder, and we have to begin building a succession plan. If we want this thing, this enterprise, this mission, this ministry, this business to outlast the founder, we have to start thinking past the founder.
That's right.
And when you're the founder, we don't often think we need to think past me because we only see me. And that's just a terrible but honest self-assessment is I need to be introspective enough to know that just as every story ends, my story will end. But how my story ends may be up to me. that I could take steps now that would give me a very different ending than if I don't.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, this is almost a cautionary tale of 4 out of 5 businesses are going to close and shutter because the owners did not think ahead and did not prepare ahead.
And it's not an overwhelming task. You just have to give it some time and some thought and some preparation. So we when we work with our clients, we have these tools we use.
Okay.
So rather than just say, well, what do you think? We say, let's work through this process, give you variables, give you thoughts and how to play with things. And then once we start to work on the plan, like we use a thing called success factor grid. What are the factors that we need to do? What are the things we need to accomplish to create success? And success factor grid could be including financial stuff. It could be, my employees are not happy. That my morale is kind of bad. Well, how do we improve morale? What kinds of things do we need to do? Somebody doesn't want to come in and buy a company whose employees aren't happy, right? That's much better for work. And so we have this success factor grid so that we can begin to pinpoint the kinds of things that you need to do to march down the road. And when we get into the assessment and we look at those things, that's what takes the time. Personal example, okay? I'm an older guy. I'm 73.
All right.
I continue to do what I do because I love what I do. But I, thought years ago about I need to find a successor because when you're in a business that sells services and you stop being able to do the services, you close your doors. And so I wanted there to be that continuance. It took me 5 years to find a successor. And he's been in place for 2 years. And he's doing really cool now, but it took time and effort to get to that particular point because I was intentional about it.
So you mean you're taking your own medicine?
You bet, babe.
Yeah, me too. Right. I mean, I don't want to be the cobbler with holes in my shoes, but these are things that all of us should think about up front. Is my own story. I want to tell my story well. I want to begin well, and I want to end well. Mm-hmm. Right. And so for you, you've already developed up. What's your successor's name?
Aaron. You met him.
Right.
Yeah.
So Aaron. So it's not just you. You're not all of Agora. You have a younger understudy who is ready.
Yeah,
to
we have a
pick
team behind us that does the work, but I wanted somebody that could come alongside of me and take the business and grow it and play with it and enjoy it, and that's something that they wanted to do. And so in Aaron's case, it was a perfect fit of him coming alongside. He already had skills and abilities in the M&A space, but where does he play with those? Where does he practice those? And a lot of people consult on their own. Which is, to me, it's kind of boring, but how could we play with that? How could we do that? And I was very intentional. Part of it was because of my wife, right?
Okay.
She was like, what are you going to do? When are you going to retire? All these kind of things. And it's like, well, I've got to give this some thought. And so I've been working on it for quite a while.
Yeah, but it's easier to tell somebody, hey, this fitness regime works when you're already on the fitness regime, right?
That's right.
So, when I practice what I preach, it's a little more consistent story than the guy who says, do what I say, but not what I do.
Yeah, exactly.
So, that's a wonderful example. I'm very blessed. My grandfather passed at 95, just short of his 96th birthday.
Wow.
And when he passed, he was the oldest practicing attorney in Texas. And so, to me, I got to see that the practice of law was a way to help people solve problems, take care of their family. My goal is to kind of maximize wealth, minimize taxes, care for your loved ones, and protect your assets. That's, if I were to summarize what we do, the elevator pitch is I help you keep your money. But we do that by protecting those that you love, and part of that is ending well. So, if I was sitting here listening to these stories, I heard that one of our biggest mistakes was waiting too late. What's another mistake that business owners make in trying to sell their business?
So waiting too long, right? Being plateaued, being stuck, and doing something that doesn't have any growth. You have to respond to the market and have a product that the market is excited about purchasing in order to have much value as a business. That's just a given, right? But it's the same thing from a buyer's perspective. They want that kind of exciting products. If you're an HVAC guy and you're doing plain old same old stuff versus this other guy who's doing really cool stuff, he's got the plain stuff too, but he's doing really cool new stuff. Who am I going to want to buy? That guy, because he's doing that newer kind of things. There's dangers. Let me just talk about it from that standpoint. Okay, some of the issues, and you'll relate to this as an attorney. A company that has unclear capitalization table, the ownership is foggy. I promised my cousin 20 years ago I would give him some stock, and of course you didn't. And now that your company's worth $500 million, he may come out of the woodwork. And so you want to make sure that your capitalization is clean. You want to make sure that your books are clean. One of the things that you need to make sure you do when you work through the process, either with us on the front end or with somebody helping you actually, consummate that sale, is honesty. You got to be honest. You got to put all your cards on the table. Buyers appreciate businesses that sit down and say, here it is, warts and all. Here it is, right? Because most warts are fixable. And if you hide them back, then what's that buyer going to think? Well, what else is he hiding, right? And so you want to just lay all the cards on the table. So honesty is critical. Just openness is super important. Having financial statements that are clear and understandable. Having the ability that you filed all your tax returns and all those kinds of stuff. That's really critical. A good team behind you. Good company morale. Your employees care about what they do. They're excited to come to work. People bitch about the quality of employees today. They can't find good work. Well, they may not be happy to work because maybe their working conditions aren't conducive to them being happy, right? So how do you flip that around? How do you change that? And so there's certain characteristics. We do this thing. It's a 35-point grid that we look at, and we call it an optimization grid. Each of those points that are along that grid, revenue and growth and stability and financial clarity and employee health and good solid leadership and operational excellence and just the things that you look at, that you model out, that you come up with, kind of a plan to fix those things. There's 35 of those.
Wow. Well, that's something almost every healthy business needs to be thinking about.
Yep.
But that if all of us, in my business we do business planning, but we also do the estate planning because you got to take care of the family too.
Right, sure.
And the sad fact is my mom has passed, my dad is 83, you're going to be 83 this year, and we're all on this curve, right? Mm-hmm. We all think that this perpetual up and to the right, that we're always going to be young. So it's sitting at age 53, where am I? Have I coasted by now over the hill? If somebody says I'm over the hill, then my answer is I'm just picking up momentum.
Right.
Am I still at the top of the hill or am I way down at the bottom? And how long do I get to coast?
Yeah.
But having some honest self-assessment about that to say that, even if I'm 10 years out or 15 years out, one of the things that's true for our generation is that we're just living longer. One of the most interesting facts when I started practicing law in 1995, Cornell University had come out with a study that said that more wealth than the wealth of all of America was going to pass from one generation to the other by the year 2012. Mm-hmm. Well, they are right. There is this huge sum of wealth that's going to pass, but everybody's lived so much longer. They missed it. It's not 2012. We're in 2025, and people are living well on to their 80s and 90s. Yeah. The stats say if husband and wife both make 60, one of them's going to 90. I regularly deal with people in their 50s and 60s that are still caring for a mother or a father who's still alive. And if you understand that, then the question begins, well, how long do I want to stay in the game? Right? We've got to watch a generation be retired more than that generation got to watch their parents, right? They lived harder lives. Their life expectancies were shorter, 70 to 72 years. And now lots of people are saying, well, maybe I need to run my business better, right? So lots of these things, beginning with the end in mind, are looking at this target of how do I want to exit, would also help you start to build your business better.
Right.
Build your business differently so that I am going to focus on, I'm going to give my business equal to my kids, but number one son's been here working for 20 years. That's probably not fair, right? If the other two kids didn't do anything to contribute, as a lawyer, I would say to you, that kid's labor's worth something, right? There was the value of the business when he started, but where you are today is now 20 years later, due to some of his investment, you never made him an owner, and he's worked like an owner. Mm-hmm. Those are things that you ought to start talking through before you think, how do I want to end, as opposed to I'm just going to chop it up and divide it between you and your brothers and sisters. That just may not be fair.
Right. Well, they may not get along.
That's right.
I mean, family transitions are tough.
Yes.
Because there's just little things that go on that happen that, I mean, it's difficult to do family transition kind of things. Yeah, you bring up a good point, because one of the characteristics that we see, one of the negatives that we see, and it's really understandable, is people don't know how to let go, because they don't know what they're going to do next. They're so focused on what they do that when they look out and say, well, if I sell my business, what am I going to do? I don't want to go play golf all day, every day. I don't want to go fishing all the time. I mean, those things are fun occasionally, but you know, you need to sit down, and there are advisors and people that can even help you do that. But look at what can I do? What would be really fun to go do? Because in my opinion, retirement is not a biblical concept, right? It's kind of a Protestant concept. You know, we work hard and then we can retire and we can enjoy the fruits of our labor, but you get bored. So how do we take and go do something next, right? What kinds of things might really get us excited? And sometimes it's just a question of going to that business owner and saying, go talk to XYZ to think through that question. And they come back and they're all pumped, let's sell, right? Because they've got it figured out that what they're going to go do next. And so that's kind of an important thing to think through.
For sure. But just as a genuine compliment to you, the question may be, I love what I do. And my next may be not me being the guy doing it all. Maybe I will train an understudy.
Right.
Right. So one of my heroes is Benjamin Franklin. It's interesting. His daddy was a candle maker. He grew up in the strict Massachusetts under the puritanical Cotton Mather, and he just did not like how uptight it was. So we all know he's a famous Pennsylvania Quaker because he moved off to Pennsylvania where people were open-minded. In church, everybody got to talk. You know, it was a much more communal way. But he didn't become a candle maker. He became a printer. So his business was he got contracts for printing the money for different states. But he owned multiple print shops over the years, and that was his methodology. He did train a journeyman. He would begin with this agreement that you're going to work for me for 3 to 5 years. You're going to get a percentage of the profits, and then at the end of our time, you're going to buy me out. And just understanding that process, that maybe it's not that I just leave, but maybe I am going to step to second chair. Maybe I'm going to step back. So like Grandpa was not... He had done years of all kinds of trial work and different things, but he was litigating disability and Social Security claims when he was in his 90s, right? And what he had done had changed. And I think that that's something to say to a small business owner too, right? If you're trying to build something that would carry on, whether that next generation of buyer, like in your uncle's case, if he would have brought in and had a journeyman who was ready to drive, maybe that guy wanted to buy, maybe he didn't, but if he was there, your uncle could have at least sold, because he'd have something worth buying. And that kind of takes a humility of mindset change, right? From I'm the alpha that goes and makes this thing happen, it's not going to work without me, to I'm the team captain or I'm the team leader that's going to build me a team that's going to work. And then that goes into all those things you've talked about.
Right.
Culture, honesty, integrity. Do I have good, clean books? You know, there is a growth curve here. If I'm going to build something that's worth selling, I'm going to have to hire up people and learn how to know what an income statement is and know what a balance sheet is and know what my assets are. Well, I just got a bunch of trucks. Well, Bubba, you got 27 trucks and 13 trailers. That's $5 million worth of rolling materials you have out there. That's not nothing. That is something.
Not chump change.
Right.
No kidding.
So those are great pitfalls to avoid. Those are dangers to avoid. But what have you seen to be the biggest ingredient for success for businesses that were successfully able to attract a buyer? What was that? Is there any one ingredient or one action that they took that made the difference?
So, I hate to say it this way, kind of crudely, but it's a simple 3-letter word: fun.
Okay.
The business was fun. Right.
Okay.
It may have been hard. It may have been difficult. There may have been struggles and so forth. But there's something about the business that there's this aroma of fun. There's this aroma of success. There's this aroma of enjoyment. That people that have that kind of business, and a lot of businesses can get there with some simple fixes, but having that makes the business attractive. right? You remember I used in this one seminar that we did yesterday, I used this example of a sock hop, right?
Right.
And that's a generational thing.
Right.
I don't think they do those anymore. But you'd stand in the gymnasium in your socks, and the girls would be on one side of the gym and the guys on the other, and you had to go dance, right? That was the whole point. Well, you want to go dance with Betty, and Betty, you have to know what Betty thinks. You have to know what she finds attractive. You have to understand so that you can create that and then go do that and find, her attractive to you. Have fun with that. So there's something about a business that's attractive, that's fun. It's kind of a story, right? It's kind of an adventure. There's words we put on it that aren't business. It's not the black and white of business. It's not the black and white of what you do. We worked with a small business a couple years ago. It was a really cool company. They made high-end, high-tech, foul weather gear for dogs.
Okay.
Jacket. Maybe people that had their dogs in tough
Alaska
conditions, Minnesota,
right,
Alaska, Southern California. No. And so they had this rain gear and these fleece jackets that these dogs could wear, and they were very high end, very expensive kind of stuff. But there were dog owners that said, if I can go out and buy a really nice jacket for myself, I want to make sure that my dog is taken care of too. But there was something about the business that was fun, that was exciting. They got involved in rescue dogs and supporting rescues. And so a portion of their profits went to the rescue organizations. And there were people that loved that about them. And they were really big on Facebook and social media, doing those kinds of things. And so the buyer of that business fell in love with that story, what they were doing, not just the business, but what they were doing with their business to make a difference in the community and to their customers and to people out there, as well as the canines that were their essentially semi-customers, right? So it's cultivating that kind of aroma. Remember the thing about the word, the aroma of your business. And that takes a little thought and a little creativity, but that makes it so much more fun because that's what the buyer first senses. That's what the buyer first sees, and they can really get excited about that stuff and then want to continue that story on.
I love it. Well, Garry, this has been super helpful and enlightening, just for, as I sit here, I get to practice what I preach, right?
Yep.
Not only do I help small business owners, I am a small business owner. We talk about telling a story. We talk about making it fun. We talk about looking at the end and how we hand off. But that can just be part of the process, but you need to be intentional about it.
Right.
You need to begin ahead of time. One of the verses I really enjoy is Colossians 3:21 through 23. Do all your work as unto the Lord, as a faithful workman. For it is the Lord Christ whom you serve, and from whom you will receive the reward of the inheritance, right?
Yeah.
But there's this reward, and there is a reward, right? We do it because it's fun. We do it because Jesus loves me, and I'm supposed to love God and love others. But it is fun when my clients leave after estate planning meetings and say, I just feel so relieved. And it's fun when I set up the Young Guys LLC and he goes and gets his business card and his signs on the door. There's this joy in that. And when you can convey that joy, that does become contagious.
That's right. That's right.
My daddy, my daddy's my hero. The reason I serve small business owners is he's a State Farm agent, still is. And one of my buddies said, so, Jim, what's the secret to success? He said, when you love what you do, it's not work. Right? I've heard people say when you do what you do, whether you got paid or not. Well, the truth is when you do what you do and it's excellent, people want to pay for it. They're going to pay for good service or bad service. Right? And if they like you, they'd be glad to pay you as opposed to anybody else if you offered the service. But that takes a mindset change from I'm just trying to get a buck or I'm just trying to make money to I'm trying to serve somebody and help somebody. And if we change that to we're thinking about a buyer, I'm not trying to sell my business. I'm helping somebody continue to do this moral good.
That's right.
I'm going to help somebody continue to have fun. I'm going to present an opportunity for a buyer to come in and to be part of that. And there are lots of people who would like to buy into that. But unfortunately, if we're not even thinking about that or don't even know that's the target, A buyer doesn't even know we're for sale.
Yeah.
Right? Buyer doesn't even know what we're offering. If all we have is a one-page sheet that some business broker threw out there, and we can't even start the story or present it to a buyer in a way that they can understand it, our likelihood of success is very
Yeah,
low.
it's that story is so critical, and how that's conveyed, because you want it to be something that is exciting and fun, and you want to be drawn to it rather than a business that's like, oh geez, that doesn't sound any fun. Why bother buying that one? And so that's a critical factor. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I look forward to helping you and introducing you to some of my clients I think that you can help, and help us all end as well as we began.
Yeah. So we do have a document that we
Okay.
could send people if you could get that out there.
Yeah, we can.
It's basically a book that walks people through some of these questions and some of these things to think about. It doesn't. It's not an end all, right? You still need support and guidance, but it kind of begins to walk you down the road of being able to do that, and we can certainly make that available to your audience.
That's awesome. We'll put a post at the end here. And if they want to go check you out, they can go out to agoraconsulting.us.
Right, that's our address.
And
Yeah.
out there, and it has a nice little intro video, has a contact me page. That's a good way to get hold of
Right,
me.
yeah, and the resource is actually on the website. We
Okay.
can make that available, that specific page,
Great.
so people can download that document and play with it. Yeah, it'd be
Awesome.
great.
Excellent.
We certainly take time to talk to people. If somebody contacts us and says, I'd like to talk to you about selling my business, we don't charge for an introductory consultation. Just let's talk. And sometimes the introductory consultation might take a few times, but let's talk about what you're trying to do. Our heart is to try to help them, right? You hate to see businesses fail. And so we want to help people, whether it be smaller businesses or a little bit larger kind of businesses. So people can certainly contact us and reach out for a consultation as well.
Great. I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate
All right,
the time.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Well, this is David Groce, and until next time, adios. Texas Tax and Lawman Legal Disclaimer. Hey, I'm a lawyer. You know I have to have some lawyer mumbo jumbo. This is a general information video, not client attorney privilege information. The content is information only and is not directed to any specific facts or circumstances and cannot be relied upon as a legal opinion, even though that would be nice and save you a trip to the lawyer. If you have a specific legal question, feel free to contact David Groce directly or seek qualified legal or tax counsel in your state of residence, state of mind, or whatever place you call home.